Welcome to the CRO Talks podcast, the companion podcast for the CRO Roundtable, bite-sized chunk of content summarizing a recent roundtable discussion topic. So we've been on a kick lately talking about the ins and outs of metrics for tests and experiments, like when you should set them up, how you should categorize them, etc. Today, we're kind of maybe wrap that up a little bit with talking about how many metrics should you track. So there's potentially an issue of wanting to track too few or too many metrics on a test and what kind of problems those cause. And so how do you get yourself into sort of that Goldilocks zone of having the exact right amount of metrics to track onto your experiment to balance production versus accessibility, ability to analyze, etc. So first off, let's get into what are the cons of having too many or too few metrics?
So cons of too few metrics then is not learning anything from a test. So if you're not
that
tracking,
sort of like defeats the purpose. Like having too few is like, well, don't bother.
yes, and I've seen tests run with literally just the primary metric, and that, I mean, it works for some tests where they're super simple, but for most tests, I'd say that just causes analysis paralysis at the end, where they're kind of going, we don't know.
There's nothing here to look at.
Or rather, it's action paralysis at the
Yeah.
end, actually. It's action paralysis.
Yeah.
So basically, at the end, after the test, they have no idea what to do. And then they miss learnings, and or they see, oh yeah, maybe the issue is because of X segment or that segment or whatever, but there's no way to tell because you didn't track the metrics.
Worst case scenario is not learning anything at all. Like
Absolutely,
total,
worst
completely
case
wasted time and effort running a test that you didn't get anything out of.
Yeah.
Second worst, and still, but not quite as bad, is missing learnings. Like you at least got something out of it, but you didn't get the whole picture painted adequately. Like, oh, we at least figured out that, making, doubling the size of the image gets more people to click on it, but we don't know what the effect of increasing that click is.
Yeah.
Like, is that actually beneficial or not? Like, hey, twice as many people are clicking into our products from categories, but we don't know if that's increasing order conversion because we missed tracking that or something. And then past that is lack of segmentation. So inability to drill down within those results to filter them and make sure that different audiences, like how the test affects different audiences, right? Because you want a keystone principle of doing analysis is you want to do some sort of segmentation analysis on your test results to ensure that it's actually correct. Good example being comparing desktop versus mobile traffic. Like if you're running the test across like multiple breakpoints and stuff, right? Like depending on the targeting conditions, all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. You want to make sure that you're collecting that demographic data so that you can apply segmentation as well. And most test tools will have mechanisms for doing that. Like a lot of them have out of the box, segmentation tools, like I said, like device type, browser type, new versus returning, etc. Like there's some common ones that the test tool has pre-configured. A good test tool will allow you to create your own custom segmentation. As well.
So
your purpose.
So the metrics isn't just clicks on something. It's
right. It's not just
metric,
goals.
It's something that you can use to create a segment with. And this whole there's this cuddly message that we often get, which is, oh, there's no such thing as a failed test. There's absolutely such a thing as a failed test. A failed test is where you basically end the test and you have no idea what to do next, no idea what to do with this information, that is a failed test. So let's move on to the
failure, not in the terms of like the results, failure in terms of the execution.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Now, on the flip side, what are the cons of having too many metrics that you're trying to track?
Yeah, and this depends. This is very, very tool specific and also company specific and also resource specific, because the answer is going to differ very wildly depending on which team,
Right.
company
Yeah.
you're talking to.
If you're a one-man show doing everything by yourself, too many for you is going to be different than a 20-person CRO team executing experiments.
Yeah, and the feeding into that then, or bridging on from that then, is analysis paralysis. This is a term I often hear bandied around. So after a test finalizes, the product owner has lots of questions because there's lots of metrics, and the analyst is just stuck in a hellscape world of picking apart lots of metrics for a test that was just a button color test. So yeah.
And so analysis paralysis is right, the inability to make a decision because you have too much data that you're sifting through.
Yeah.
You're like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And you're
Mm.
going in all of these different directions. There's also uh, a perverse incentive version of analysis paralysis where you're dealing with too many metrics, where you're slicing things up to try and find a winner
Yes.
to
Yes.
justify like uh, uh, effort cost or like the
It's a
test.
trap.
Like every test has to be a winner in
Yeah.
some way, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh well, this performed well for women on Thursday who live in the Pacific Northwest, right?
Hey, don't knock women who live on
No,
the
no,
Thursday
I'm just
in the
saying like
Pacific
that's
Northwest.
a
Okay.
hypothetical example of like, oh, we've like sliced the data up so much that you're applying like 4 or 5 combinatory segments to drill down to find something where the conversion goal shows a
Yeah.
plus rather than a minus.
So I'm sorry to all the women who had to hear Matt say that, but yeah, let's move on.
Another issue with too many metrics is from a production standpoint. It slows down the test construction pipeline. Like you're trying to
Yes.
build and attach too many goals or create too many segments within the tool. Now, some things you can facilitate that a little bit easier. Like a lot of test tools, the construction of those aspects is decoupled from the test. So once you create it once, you can reuse it. Like
Mhm.
as an example, I use Convert a lot. And once you've created a goal once, it's usable on any test that you create in the future,
Yeah.
right? So I've only had to create a goal one time. But so over time you accumulate a library of goals and you become more efficient. But still, like say you're wanting like 50 different goals for an experiment. Well, that's like okay, that's going to even still be time consuming to configure all of that. And it's also going to be an analysis process because how are you going to have time to analyze 50 different data points on a
Yeah.
single test?
But also sometimes a lot of them are just guardrails. So if they're
Hmm.
guardrails, like we just want to make sure that we're not harming these metrics, then that also falls into the too few metrics, because you want to make
Right.
sure you have enough guardrails to be able to safely make a decision about a test.
Guardrails are often going to be things that are those reusable type of goals. Like it's going to be the
Yeah,
one that you're commonly using over and over and over again.
because these are metrics that you're just looking at to see, is it negative or not. That's all you're interested
Mhm.
in, that it's not negative, and then after that it's a very, very quick check. So I think there's a level of a checkiness to a metric.
Level of checkiness.
And
Yeah.
if the
Well,
checkiness quotient
checkiness,
is,
let's more like level of interest. Like if
yeah, there
it's a
you go.
primary metric, you're gonna like really be focused on it and looking at it and like probably applying segmentation to that and
Yeah,
looking at that in different ways.
that's a
A
proper
guardrail
English
metric
word, I
is,
think.
yeah, this one's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Now this is also less of an issue, one with a bigger team because you're going to have more resources available,
Hmm.
but also, like I said, um, pre-configuring and telemetry are going to help with that as well.
Yeah,
Of like setting up your test tool to feed test and variation data out to other systems so you can dig deeper and analyze stuff after the fact. So say
hmm,
as an example, um, feeding your test and variation IDs into your heat mapping tool or into Google Analytics or something so that you can use those data points as segments or filters to apply. So say like, oh, give me a heat map for users in a particular variation. So you can look at that within the context. So that way, like as an example, you're not having to set up a goal to track clicks on like all of these different elements on the page. You can just use your heat map for that
yeah,
instead.
yeah. That's true. That's also a really good point. Is that that has a bearing on the number of metrics that you track. So let's move on to like how what are some ways of deciding on the number of metrics. So we've talked about what is that Goldilocks zone. So how do you get to that Goldilocks zone?
First up, and we've discussed this many times, is doing a pre-mortem to make sure that you're picking the right metrics. So you think about the test and what are the different potential outcomes of the test and what data will enable you to make a decision for those outcomes. Like, hey,
So
if this is a winner, how are we going to, what are the criteria that we're going to use to determine if this is a winner? If this is a save, what are the criteria? What things are we going to look at to make sure that the we don't have a test failure, meaning like like there's no errors or problems with it,
mm,
etc. Right? So basically, putting down what are the things of importance.
yeah, so you're basically working backwards. So
Hmm.
you kind of go, well, this test was what if the test was inconclusive? What could be possible reasons why the test could be inconclusive? And what are some metrics to be able to determine those reasons, and then after that you put those metrics on the list, and then you end up with a list of metrics that you want to track for lots of different sort of potential outcomes, and then you prioritize putting those metrics in. So yeah, that's basically a pre-mortem to determine, like, just kind of almost make a prediction in terms of, and it's a very easy prediction to make,
Yeah,
what could happen.
it's a quick thought process
Mhm.
exercise. It's not like a detailed like, oh, you have to sit down for a week with the entire team to like check a
So
bunch of
for a
check
week,
boxes
that's a
or
long
something. Right?
meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, and so now once you've done a pre-mortem, you kind of like defined the goals or the metrics that you want.
hmm,
Um, then the next step in your test pre-planning is looking at like the time frame of those metrics and
hmm,
applying some statistical pre-calculation to determine like if that will be if like tracking that metric is viable within the time frame that we're working for with the test. So first do your sample size calculations and all that. Like, okay, what's your primary metric? How much do you get in a given period of time? Using a calculator to determine your MDE, using that to see like, okay, do we have a viable time frame for the test? So okay, so now if you say, okay, we have to run the test 6 weeks, like, will you have a viable enough sample for all of the goals that you're looking at within the context of their level of importance? So for
yeah,
your primary metrics, you want to do your MDE calcs and say like, okay, yes, we can get enough within this time frame, or no, we can't. Can we extend the time frame? How does that affect the other metrics that we're looking at?
And a lot of these metrics that going to fall out of the pre-mortem are going to be secondary metrics that are very close to the area of change. So then that means that when you are monitoring that test, the likelihood of you seeing something significant is going to be pretty high, because or rather, the likelihood of you seeing a big difference could be potentially high because it's closer to the area of change. It's not going to be a very necessarily a small change, because we've often seen like huge changes, and they're often due to either defects or some real severe shifts in user behavior or something like that, which is exactly the reason why you are putting those metrics in the first place. So then, if you track the Z score, do a Z, I think it's called a Z modified Z test, where you're basically looking for anything less than negative 3.5, anything more than 3.5 Z score, and that is indicating the magnitude of that of the metric shift. And sometimes I've seen that magnitude be super high or super low, like negative 16 or something like that when there's a defect. And again, this is why you added these metrics in the first place, perhaps as a guardrail or perhaps as to detect a behavior shift.
Now you're talking about doing like Z-score calculations. This is the next step, like after the test has actually gone
Yes,
live.
this is after the test.
This isn't pre-calc work. This is.
Oh yeah, that's a really good point. It's not pre-calc work, but do keep that in mind for the pre-calc work, because you even though you might find that, oh yeah, we're going to need to see some significant shifts, so let's not bother putting that metric in. No, put that metric in, because you could be seeing a significant shift. That's the reason why you're putting that metric in the first place.
Right.
So yeah. So
Yeah.
there's a balance. There's a balancing act there.
Yeah, and doing this pre-planning work will also expose like the viability of the test. Like
Yes.
sometimes you'll end up with a scenario where the test isn't viable given the time frame and the sample and the things that you're wanting to track. And that prevents production issues, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not building and running a test that's not going to be viable, and then you're not trying to torture those results into something that doesn't exist.
Yeah. And I think I just want to point out that Booking.com and Jordan Lentz, who is on the CRO Roundtable, he talked about a really interesting sort of solution that Booking.com have got in place for tracking over, what was it, 1,500 plus metrics?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a very advanced, like,
Yes.
yeah.
But it's super cool, because what their process, or what the technical system does is it tracks 1,500 over 1,500 metrics, and then whatever is significant, whenever there's a metric of interest, whenever there's a change of interest happening to one of those metrics, it surfaces up on their dashboard. And that is such a good solution for hitting that Goldilocks zone, because you don't even need to worry about it for a lot of these metrics, because you're tracking all of these metrics, and they're only going to show up when there's something to see.
Yeah, but that's a very much more advanced, like, automation, right? There's a lot of engineering work that has gone into creating something like that. It's not like, if you're at the level where you're using a third-party testing tool, like,
Yeah,
you're beholden to the capabilities of your tool, right? Like, that's something where they're at the level, like, they're building their own tools and systems to
yeah,
execute.
but that's
Like,
the dream.
it's integrated, like, it's just
Yeah,
part of the site system.
yeah, but they hold the keys to the dream.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I like that, keys to the tree.
And they're just dangling it in front of
Yeah,
us every
that's right,
round table.
that's right.
Jordan is. So what are some other? So I thought we'd round off by talking about some of our past experiences with too many or too few metrics on a test. And I think you've got an interesting case study to talk through.
Yeah, this isn't for a single specific test, but was rather a process learning that I arrived at early on in working with one of my clients. So uh, the way that they operate, they sell fairly large, expensive products, and oftentimes orders are a single item because it's a purpose based purchase. Like someone's purchasing this product to solve a like a mechanical need that they have, and
Mm,
so um, their average order value is usually about $300 to $400, but occasionally they'll get like a large $10,000 order because it's someone purchasing a bulk amount of items, or they also sell like $10,000 products that are infrequently purchased as well. And so their revenue reporting is susceptible to skew, where if during the duration of a test you had one of those large outlier orders, it throws off all of the revenue calculation because it looks like whatever variation that order was happened to be bucketed into is now been boosted way higher than what their average order value is. So we needed a way to account for those revenue outliers, you know. And initially we just had a single goal tracking all total revenue cumulative for the duration of the test. And so it was a whole bunch of extra work where, where you can still go in and look at like revenue like day to day for a test and the variation and see like, oh, there's a large order here that we need to account for and stuff. But it's still a lot of extra work to manually extract that and recalculate all of the revenue data and stuff. And so a solution that I arrived at is setting up a second revenue goal that only
mm.
tracks revenue for orders under $10,000. So we end up with two different revenue goals for that client to solve a problem. And there's a problem of convenience
Yeah.
in like saving time to not have to do extra work to like manually recalculate for outlier orders and
Because
stuff.
that's really smart, because basically what that means is you know that there's a metric that you're super keen on seeing, and you don't want to spend time in your analytics tool to do
Right.
that segment. So then your metric is ready segmented, and you when you see it in the dashboard, you can get a very quick read in terms of, is this positive, is this negative.
Right. Because we
um,
still want to see both things. Like we still want to see total revenue because there might be something in the test that's actually encouraging larger orders,
yeah.
or like maybe some change makes it easier to make a bulk purchase, so more people start making bulk purchases, whereas before there was just enough friction where they're like, nah, I'm going to go somewhere else because this is annoying, or something like that. So I still want to see all that totality, but I also want to be able to like filter those out to see, okay, on average, if it's not having a large outlier order effect,
Mm,
have it the normal revenue bands to look at as
mm,
well.
yeah. I had a very similar sort of thing to do with segments and stuff, at a fairly large train company that I used to work at. And I think I got through that okay. Where the goal was to shift from one search results page to another, and the reason for that shift was something other than, hey, we want to see conversion increase. It was a functional requirement that was needed for future sort of product features to go in. So it's a non-inferiority test basically, and as part of that sort of activity to shift from one layout to another, there's a lot of user testing going on. There's a lot of de-risking to make that move. and the A/B test was that last step in that de-risk. But we didn't have a very long time to make that shift. So basically, what he did was sat in the user tests that we were running, saw that there were some areas of concern around specific metrics or specific areas that users were having problems with, challenges with, or just like a little bit confused about, or something that we thought, hey, maybe this could be something dangerous that could happen, that could make this whole fall over. Based on those user tests, figured out some secondary metrics, and I tracked the heck out of that test.
Track
It was
the heck
like,
out of those metrics.
yeah, track the heck out of those metrics. I think my record number of metrics was like, I think it was like, must be over 30, 40 plus. And this is all
Wow.
visible in the dashboard. And what happened when we launched the test? Well, straight away, we had to turn it off in about 3 days because it was super, super negative. And what I saw, because I had all of those metrics tracked, I could very, very clearly see that there were some negative trends on some of these secondary metrics. Behavior had changed in some shape or form around specific areas. And so because of that, of doing segments and stuff like you mentioned, to be able to segment via this metric and seeing what the impact was and stuff. Because of that, I was able to iterate really, really quick by fixing just those metrics and then just that area of the UI, and then relaunch the test with a second iteration. And then that kind of fixed those issues. And we could see that fixed those issues because we had it ready to see in the dashboard. So you could see like, okay, that was negative. Now it's not as negative as it was before, and now we can let the test run. And then after, I can't remember how long, two weeks or something like that. We called the test, and yeah, we were able to shift. And none of that would have been possible if I didn't crack the heck out of that test. So yeah.
That gives me two additional thoughts that we didn't really discuss earlier. So one, in cons of too many metrics,
Mhm.
does trying to track too many things have a performance impact on the site?
Potentially, but I mean, it
That's
should,
all.
yeah.
That's very much going to depend on your tool stack, I would say.
Yes. And also, I mean, not every test has got like that many metrics. So I think it's
Right.
on it's on a case by case basis where you check the level of risk. But yes, I mean, there wasn't like a huge amount of JavaScript on that. But yeah, there is a bit of a performance hit because there's all of these added extra requests being made
Right.
because of that additional tracking. And actually, there was one test that I also tracked the heck out of it, and I did get into trouble because I was kind of like it was triggering too many requests to a particular server, and they're kind of going, "Hey, what's going on here? It's got to be
Well,
Iqbal."
the more things you're wanting to track, the more potential for issues to come up
Yes,
from a
yes,
technical standpoint like that.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
okay, if everything's configured correctly, the scripting payload's probably pretty light. But if something's configured incorrectly, it might be causing like a JavaScript error that's cascading down,
yeah,
or something else, or
and
maybe you have like an interval loop set up to monitor something, and that
mhm,
the timing isn't set up correctly, and so it's
yeah.
like running more code or more frequently than it's supposed to, and
And
there's
sometimes it's
different things
just
like
about
that.
requests. I mean, in this instance, it was just about requests. The sheer number of times that people were using interacting with something, and actually, in that case, it was switched off within 3 days. But I got the information that I needed in order to kind of do the next iteration. So yeah, it was. Even though I did get into, I didn't get into trouble. There was some people screaming and shouting about, hey, this request, blah blah blah. But it actually did, if I didn't track those, would have been in deeper doo doo. Yeah. So it's
Or
about
there might be some sort of financial impact, like say as an example, if you're using like a free version of Google Analytics and you have, you know, an event cap for however many events you're allowed to track in a given period. If you're
yes.
trying to push too much data into there and you hit your cap and it's filled up by, let's not say junk data, but less useful
Yeah, hovers
data.
over
Right.
certain areas of the screen or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Right.
something
Yeah.
useless. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
right. So you're like, you know, your container fills up for the day and now
Yeah.
you're missing, you know, all of your like mission critical stuff,
Mm.
you know, and now it's like, oh, we need to move to GA360 and now we have, you know, whatever, a $10,000 a month bill that we have to pay or
Yeah.
something like that. So there's
All because you were
potential financial.
interested in how many people hovered over the image of the baby or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. Something less critical. And then also, so we were talking about like time frame for metrics of like doing sample pre-calcs and things like that. If you end up with a statistically non-viable test, there's still alternative methods of trying to answer your question. Like to your point of like doing other types of research, right? The
Yeah.
test
Yeah.
isn't the be all end all way of figuring things out, you know, like
Yeah.
run a survey, run a usability study, do, you know, heat mapping and session replay
Yeah.
analysis instead. All of the other good stuff that probably helped you build the hypothesis in the first place, like those are other viable methods of trying
Yeah.
to answer that question too, if you can't get it from us from a, you know, a test with statistical rigor.
Oh, I got the perfect quote. The a test is the beginning. It's not the end. That's mic drop. We
uh
we can we can we
well,
can end it on this.
I would be careful with saying that, because if you're saying the test is the beginning, don't you normally do other types of research to identify problems and develop your hypothesis first?
The bit
No,
is the
well,
second
you have to
beginning.
start right there. There's a flywheel that you're
Is a
create. Like
flywheel.
one thing leads to
Yeah,
another
you're
and
right.
stuff. So
I'll
it's
I'll get
sort of,
I'll get it
yeah.
right next time. Next week. I'll get it right.
All right, excellent. Well, as always, if anyone has any questions, feedback, or disagree with something that we said, you can always talk to me and Iqbal face to face at the CRO Roundtable every Friday at crotalks.com website or the CRO Talks LinkedIn page. If you're shy or you don't like speaking, you can connect with each of us directly on LinkedIn as well. And thanks for listening. We will catch you next time.